113-point stock market shellacking, there's no one simple question. What is an investor to do? Here now we bring in Bob Dahl, Vice Chair and Chief Equity Strategist for Fundamental Equities at BlackRock. Ron Kruszewski, Chairman and CEO of Stifel Nicolaus, and CNBC contributor Bill George, former Medtronic CEO. Ron Kruszewski, what is an investor to do? What are you telling your investors after a rough day in the office?
Oh, there's a lot of things, but mostly you've got to stay the course, Larry. You can't be liquidating into this kind of carnage. There were other things happening today, a lot of margin calls. So I think you have to stay patient and look for bargains. There is buying opportunities in this market.
Whereabouts would the buying opportunities be, Ron?
Well, I'll tell you, the financials are getting a shellacking. It's the difference between fiat currencies as denominated by the banks and gold, and all financials are getting killed, and there are some financials, I'm not going to give you specific names, but there are financials that are trading below book that are tremendous buys. You'll look back and say, I wish I'd have owned that stock at that level.
All right, so Bob Dahl, welcome back. Financials, according to Mr. Kruszewski. What about the cyclicals, which just got killed today, the economic sensitive stocks? What about the dividend stocks? I mean, utility dividends up around 5%. Isn't that better than buying a 2.4% treasury?
Absolutely, and you can get a lot of companies that are paying dividends where they're actually going to increase the dividend because of the free cash flow, the good corporate revenue growth, the good corporate earnings growth, and the cash flow that comes from that. Look, investors have panicked. They're worried about a recession, the absence of some sort of safety net that perhaps was there before, and I think they're waking up and pushing the panic button, but out of that comes buying opportunities. I agree with Ron.
Bob, is the dividend play your best play?
I like companies that have positive free cash flow. If they're paying me a dividend, they can increase it, or if they're not, they can institute one. I much prefer that to dividend payers that have high dividends. They're going to behave like bonds, and I think bonds, as we have an economic recovery, will lag.
Which sectors would those high cash flow companies be found?
Technology has awesome cash on the balance sheet and good free cash flow. They got hit hard and learned their lessons in the bust of technology in the year 2000, entered the Great Recession in better shape. The healthcare sector, I think also, particularly healthcare services, good positive free cash flow there.
Bill George, welcome back. I want to ask you, is this a homegrown correction from recession, from worries about the U.S.'s own fiscal position, or is this a European situation? How do you read this?
No, this is definitely a U.S., Larry. We've created our own crisis. The market is voting with its feet. They thought these guys would get their act together. Neither party got their act together, and they're saying we're heading for the hills.
Is that why the market sold off 265 points on Tuesday? We were down in Washington Monday night. We were part of the reportage of the passage of this budget deal. Do you think there was greater disappointment among investors than has generally been reported?
I think definitely there was, and I think they're showing they don't think that anyone in the United States has the leadership capability to get it done. We're in gridlock, and we could be there for several years, Larry, maybe 5.5 years.
Hey, Larry, with all due respect to Bill, this is not, the U.S. has its problems. We kicked the debt thing down the road, which was a bad idea. It creates uncertainty. But make no mistake about this. This is in Europe. And I'll tell you something. We're going to look back and say creating a common the euro without having common fiscal, no common central bank is a disaster. Those countries either need to grow, inflate their way out of the problem, or default. And they can't grow and they can't inflate, and that's what the market's worried about. It's a default.
Ron Kruszewski, let me just stay with that point. I want Bob Dahl to weigh in, too. All right, if we look at Europe, let's look at Italy. The funding spreads are widening substantially. Two-year swap spreads. That's an interbank problem. They're having funding problems. There's talk about an imminent Italian restructuring of their bonds. Italy is the fourth largest bond issuer in the entire world, behind the U.S., Japan, and Germany. Those problems are not going to go away soon, are they?
Well, the problem is, Larry, that do you remember when you used to go to Italy and the lira cost you 40,000 lira to get a cup of coffee? They were able, through their own, they had their debt denominated in their own currency, which is the advantage we have in the United States. The fact is today they got to pay it back in euros, and they have no way in a policy matter to handle that. And that is a huge issue and one that is confounding a lot of policymakers over there.
Bob
Well,
Dahl, the Italian banking system is rumored to be in a lot of trouble. I want to ask you what kind of contagion effect for our banking system. So far, it looks de minimis, and for our stock market. How deep does this cut in our stock market?
I think the contagion is about economic contagion, not financial contagion. I think the banks here have done a pretty good job of improving their balance sheets as it relates to Europe. The European banks own a bunch of this paper. It's about economic contagion. Of course, the ECB, what have they been doing of late? They've been raising rates. I'm not sure that helps Italy very much.
So they're too tight over there. The ECB is too tight. There's no evidence that the U.S. and New York is having interbank funding problems. Not one iota, Bob Dahl. What about the recession? That's the last question. What about the recession? You betting for it or against it?
Against it, it would be very rare given the whole list of things we have going on to have a recession. Slow, subpar growth, absolutely. But the fear of recession, I think, has been overdone. We were here a year ago. Same story. 1 year later, we didn't have a recession then. I don't think we'll have one now.
Hey, Bob,
Larry, let me jump in here.
Go ahead, gentlemen. Go ahead, Bill George.
Larry, let me jump in. I think the strong Europeans will keep this thing together, but the banks are going to have to exert some discipline on Italy and Greece and the weaker members like Portugal. I think they'll do that because there's too much at stake for Germany and for France. And I think you'll see that. But beyond that, we're not going to have a recession, but we're not going to have any growth. And what's happening is all the corporate CEOs I know are heading for emerging markets. They're cutting back investments in the United States and cutting back in Europe, and they're putting all their efforts and energies behind the emerging markets. And I think you'll see the big global companies doing very well for the next several years. I would not count them out. This is a great opportunity for energy, for IT.
Let me just challenge that, Ron Kruszewski. If there's a global slowdown threatening a recession coming out of Europe, coming out of the U.S., coming out of China, profits have been very good. They've been ignored. Is it future profits that are suspect, Ron?
Yeah, I think it's the growth rate. I think it's growth in revenue. Listen, we've had a great earnings season. Profits are up 15%, a lot of earnings surprises. But I'll go back to what Bob said. I hope from his lips to the financial god's ears about no recession. This market's concerned about, what, 0.8% growth in the first half of the year. That signals a recession, Larry. That does not signal robust growth. And you combine all these things together, and you got a little panic in the market today. But I think we can get through this with some smart policy, which it starts with reducing taxes in Washington.
All right, good luck on that. I like it. Bob Dahl, thank you. Ron Kruszewski, great stuff. Bill George, appreciate your inputs.
Thank you, Larry.
As we continue CNBC Live coverage of the 500-point sell-off in the market this busy news night.